Well, good. Well, we started a series 3 weeks ago, and we're continuing today, learning about living originally, because who wants to be a facsimile or a copycat or something other than who we are, right? And it sounds wonderful, except we find out what it asks of us, and today is no exception. I'm afraid my papers are going to blow away again, so I'm going to turn off the little rotation device here. Just got to get it right on my backside without blowing the papers, so I can keep that nice lift, especially under the arms. Okay, back to the topic at hand. So living originally, and we've been talking for a couple of weeks about this notion, and it's important, I think, to keep reminding ourselves that when we talk about living originally, we are talking about who and what we truly are. We are talking about our spiritual essence, not the flesh and blood biography of who we think we are, who we oftentimes, see ourselves as. We're talking about something more essential. And that's why you are in a place like that here. You are here to go beyond that illusory picture that sometimes the world gives us and people who have raised us have given us, which quantifies us by our physiology and by our personality. In other words, we become body-minds in the world. And the work for us to live originally is for us to go back inwardly to a sense of who we are beyond the physicality that we are. And that is a much more expanded sense of self. That's a much more free, liberated sense of being. And that capacity to live originally is what allows us to do what we cannot do humanly. So when we talk about the topic today of forgiveness, we have great difficulty doing that at the human level. Because at the human level, we have a very dualistic notion of life. And when we have a dualistic notion of life, that means that, for every action there's an equal reaction. Every action there's an equal reaction. So if we feel that we've been hurt, then what comes from us is anger, resentment, etc. From the grander self that we are, we have capacities to deal with even the most difficult situations in life. So that's where we want to go there, right? Do you want to go there? Okay, so that's the journey, and it's a journey without distance. As A Course in Miracles says, a journey without distance to a home he never left. So we're not going to become something other than who we are. We're going to become more of who and what we really are. And that is this journey to explore our original identity, the one that has only become obscured by our false impressions of who we are. So that's the background. And last week, or going back 2 weeks, we talked about one way of doing that. First sort of layer is to become aware. So most of us go through life where we experience life and then we react to life. And what we're trying to do in the awareness part of that is to introduce this idea of just becoming aware of what happens to us in relationship to the world. So that we're not just going off as one big reaction to life that's completely unconscious, which makes us pretty much a victim. You understand that? So we don't want to be victims of life. We want to be more co-creators. So we start with becoming aware. And when we become aware, then we see what happens in us. And once we see what's happening in us, then we are more in a place of choice and even control to some extent. And then last week we talked about acceptance. So beyond even being aware of what's going on with us, we wrap that in this field of acceptance. And acceptance doesn't mean that we like what's happening to us necessarily, and we're endorsing it and we're trying to sell it to all of our friends and neighbors. It isn't become something that we have that kind of a relationship with, but it is just saying, okay, it is what it is, and I'm calling it as it is, and I'm not pretending that it's something other than it is. Sort of just what we would say, getting real. And being with it in a way that's without judgment, without labeling it, without calling it good or bad, just noticing it. If there's an elephant in the room, we don't pretend that there isn't an elephant in the room. And of course, we have elephants that show up in our minds and in our hearts. And so we acknowledge that that's happening. Maybe we're feeling a certain way or we're experiencing a situation in our life, and we say it is what it is. And so what that's doing is it's moving us, and I'll have this diagram out in a little while, not yet, Penny, but we're going to have that little circles, the concentric circles idea. Because what we notice is that when we are in our sort of contracted sense of self, which is not our original self, that we kind of go through this loop. And this loop has to do with feeling down on ourselves. We feel unlovable, we feel alone, we feel separate from God, we feel separate from life, we feel separate from each other. And that is the sort of the contracted self. And that when we move into this field of awareness, and we move even farther out into the field of acceptance, we are moving away from that contracted self, and we are moving to this grander, more infinite sense of who and what we are. So does that make sense so far? That's sort of your review of how we got to today, if you haven't been here for a while. And just to remind everybody. So that's this journey. This journey is from the contracted, I think I am just, a piece of flotsam on the ocean of life and just going with the waves of fortune and misfortune, and I'm being tossed about. That's the victim. Life happens to me. We're wanting to move out of that kind of notion into knowing that we are a part of life. And we are a part of life not just in its ups and downs, but we are a part of this part of life that does not change. This eternal energy of life itself. And when we are living in that, we are in that wave, then we are surfing through life more so than being tossed about by life. We have a sense of being aware of life, but we're going with the motion of it, and we have a sense of cooperating and being aligned with this greater energy that is wanting to live through us and as us indeed. So that's our goal for this series, and we're going to move a little bit farther down the road today with this topic of forgiveness. And this is always a topic that could require a little bit of a setup, because for many of us, if we grew up in a theology in which we felt that whatever our notion of God was some sort of something that's out there somewhere that was dualistic. And what I mean by that is a God that would judge us when we were doing well and bless us when we were doing good, and that we were constantly sort of in this this mode of wondering, where we stood with the big guy, where we stood with the divine, and that sort of prescribed this sense of being unworthy, or at least living in the question at any given moment as to whether we were doing well by these higher standards from this external deity. Does anyone ever grow up with that kind of thought? Okay. So some of us have that to deal with. And so when we think in terms of forgiveness, we would say to ourselves, well, how is it that God forgives us? Because that's what we would want to have. We have to be able to forgive ourselves, of course, also. But forgiveness from that which would be considered the infinite has a very different feel and a very different context in unity, because the way we look at it is that God is love. Very simply, God is love. And there is no duality in that. There isn't God being love on a good day and God being angry, vengeful, and wrathful on a bad day. There is just the isness and the totality of the nature of love being what God is. And whatever God is to you, maybe you have this image of something out there. Unity, we see it as a presence, as a power, as a spirit, which is everywhere present. And that nature is love. So when we are talking about forgiveness from this macro perspective of how we would experience forgiveness from life, from God, from divine, from infinite, we see it very much like, and it's oftentimes used, a couple of metaphors. One of them is like the law of mathematics. If you were to add 2 and 2 and come up with 5, that would be a mistake. But the law of mathematics that makes 2 and 2 4, would it be affected at all by you coming up with the wrong answer? You can say no, you can say yes. No, it wouldn't change the law that says that 2 and 2 is 4. Regardless, if you did it over and over and over again, it would not change the law of mathematics. And so it doesn't matter how many times you and I make a mistake, the law is love. And the law will not be mocked, and the law cannot be changed, and it cannot be diminished, and it cannot be made diluted. It cannot be, there's no exception to the law. The law is love. And so when we try to understand how it is that we might be forgiven by something that is greater than ourselves, by the infinite, which sees all, which knows all, the infinite wisdom of the universe is love itself, and it has no opposite. Course in Miracles says what is all-encompassing, which is the divine, which is love, can have no opposite. So what if there is no opposite, then how can the energy that is coming to us, whether we're doing it really, really well or really screwing up, be anything other than what it is, which is love? And that's Unity's message that draws so many of us into this type of a thought system, because many of us are ready for that message. So many of us came at a time when I know personally I needed to know that I was loved. And you know, so many people, when they sort of have these cathartic crying experiences in Unity, they feel like they've come home. And what have they come home to? Their original self. This idea of living originally. This idea of coming home to who and what you really are. And to hear that message that you are loved with an everlasting love, which it does say in the Bible, in the Old Testament, you are loved with an everlasting love, and that nothing can deviate that love from you. Nothing can change that love from you. Yes, you may screw up. Yes, you may do things that are wrong in the sight of men and women, but there is not some cosmic rendering that has taken place in that mistake that could change the nature of the infinite in relationship to you or your relationship to it, except you decide and you condemn or you judge or you turn off the flow. It's up to us. And that's true in relationship to ourselves, and of course it's true in relationship to everyone. Any questions? Because that's it in a nutshell. We have more time. Good. Good. Take a breath and take all of that in. So forgiveness. When we take that as a context for what the nature of reality is, the nature of the divine is, God. And I don't use that word very often because oftentimes it's a buzzword for people and it takes them away from the reality of the Spirit indwelling us, which is the way I like to see it and feel it. But I will use that word from time to time. So what is forgiveness? What blocks us from believing that forgiveness is divinely given? And it is not judgment from outside of ourselves. Are we clear on that? Just for today. Forgiveness is cooperating with divine will. If it's the will of the divine that you be known as you were created, which is an extension of love itself, then to forgive means we are cooperating, we are aligning ourselves with the truth of our being. And it's yielding and surrendering to the impulse towards wholeness. And we're going to talk about that, and when we have this diagram up in a minute, we'll talk about that you and I, despite whatever may be going on in our surface mind, there is a part of us, our more essential self, that is moving towards wholeness. That is the impulse. That is the evolutionary impulse that is moving all of us. We are wanting to feel this integration, to know that we are whole and complete, because that's who we are. And of course, it would always be calling us, wouldn't it? If that's what you truly are, you never really forget that. It may become more obscure in your awareness, but it's always drawing us back. So forgiveness is surrendering to that impulse towards wholeness. And it's love without conditions. Something that seems so odd because so rarely do we know or have experienced or even perhaps offered love without conditions. But that's its nature. It's releasing the imprisoned splendor. So there's this sense of letting out the reality of this beauty and this wholeness and this life and this love that is encapsulated within the nature, the essence of who we are. And forgiveness, as A Course in Miracles says, is removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence. It's only removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence. It isn't to create love. See, that sometimes is something we think we have to forgive. We have to recreate love. We have to somehow bring love back. But love never goes anywhere, because if your nature is love itself, then only what has happened is there's been some sort of a construction project where you have erected a wall between you. Well, yesterday, though, just as an aside, parenthetically speaking, we were downstairs in the, the YOU basement room, and we were tearing out paneling. We were tearing out the ceiling tiles. It was very macho and dirty, and some of us had a really good time. We were grunting and groaning and sweating, and some of you would not have loved it, but we did. And but it's kind of a wonderful metaphor for getting rid of one more layer that stands between what is appearing as surface to something more foundational. The concrete walls behind the paneling are the more foundational essence of the structure. And you and I, at our foundation, we are love itself, and we have erected these false images of ourself, and we project them on other people, thereby creating a barrier between their essence and how we see them. And we judge based upon the wall, not the essence. And forgiveness would ask us to bring the walls down, or at least be willing, because we can't oftentimes do this on our own. But if we are willing, then the Spirit, that which is greater than us, that which already knows that 2 and 2 is 4, that already knows that the law is love, that already knows that their essence and your essence is love, will cooperate with your willingness, with your surrender, your yielding, your letting go of the story that keeps the wall in place. Jesus talked a lot about forgiveness. He's our master teacher. And he's got a couple of lines in here that are quite curious, and perhaps you've been troubled by them, so I thought I'd share them with you today, and we could talk about them a little bit. He says, "If you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses." So this is curious for us, because what it sounds like that there's sort of a condition going on here. And that for us to be forgiven, quote, forgiven, which means we have to understand what that means. And if we bring it back to our unity understanding of what it means, to be forgiven, since love is what we are, and the divine already sees us as love itself, and having no blame or shame coming from the divine, then to be forgiven by the divine is only something that we do. But if we judge somebody else, then by the very way that we judge, we close our heart. You can't judge somebody without closing your heart. I got to get back in the wind back here. I'll get too hot, I might not forgive myself. So when we close our heart, then we put ourselves, we close our heart, we put ourselves out of the capacity to be the extension of what we are. So if we're love and I close my heart because I'm judging somebody else, and now I'm not here to discuss the righteousness of that judgment or the rationalization of that judgment or how unkind somebody may be or how justified you might be in holding condemnation. We're not talking about the facts. We're just talking about the dynamics of spiritual understanding, spiritual growth, freedom, love, peace, and wholeness. Now, if you're not interested in any of those things, we can go back to the story. But for now, just holding this notion that if peace and wholeness and love and freedom are what you're after, then knowing that when I judge somebody else, I close my heart. Now, we only have one heart. And I'm not talking about the physical heart, but I am talking about that part of us that gives and receives love. So if I close that heart because I've judged another, then I am not going to be able to receive that love from the infinite. Because by the very conduit through which I would judge another that I have now closed off, I am precluded from receiving. It's the causeway to the expression of love. It's also the conduit through which I receive that love. So if I do not, if you forgive your other trespasses, if you forgive others their trespasses, your Father will forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. We're not talking about some external operation taking place. We are talking about what you will experience. We are either the way of love, or we are in the way of love. Right? Because if you're it, if you no longer can look around and go, why isn't God loving me? And why isn't so-and-so loving me? And how come I'm not getting the love I want and deserve? And why am I being judged? All of those experiences are within the choice that we make with our hearts. And this is a high teaching, right? But if you think of it in terms of the law of mathematics that will not be mocked, that love is the law. Grace is the law. Grace meaning we receive love whether we earned it or not. You understand? If I equate my lovableness from the infinite love to whether I'm doing well or not doing well, then I have put something very limited and very human and very fearful on something which is infinite and unconditional and pure. So we have changed the law of love, and we have limited ourselves, and we have denied ourselves, and we have denied others. And we can take it all back. And we can return to the essence of who we are. And we can find ourselves back in this field of love. And it's a choice we make. One other that Jesus talked about, he said, when you are offering your gift at the altar, and if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go first and be reconciled to your brother or sister. And then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you're still on the way to court with him, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. Sounds like an angry, pissed off Jesus to me. I don't know about you, but it's not the Jesus that maybe that's the Jesus, same day turned over the tables. I don't know, but what's he saying here? He's not talking about prisons and judges, and he is talking about accusers. Could be a person, could be yourself, could be, anyone have a critic? Nobody here, but you know people that do. This is your accuser. So making peace with that person is, again, it may or may not be something that you do in terms of completely confronting that individual and going through an act of working it out and reconciliation. But it is definitely something that you have to do in your heart. Because to the extent that I hold resentments and judgments and condemnations of other people, who's in prison? Me. I am. And I will not get out of that prison until I reconcile in my heart. So forgiveness is not something we do to let somebody else off the hook, necessarily. That may or may be what comes from it. But we do it so that we get back to our original selves. We let ourselves off of the hook of judgment and condemnation so that we can be back in the flow again, and we can be the inlet and the outlet. We can be the realizer and the expresser of all that God is. Amen? Okay, we'll leave it there for today. I'm available for counseling throughout the week. I'm laughing, but I know this is a topic that does bring up maybe some of the more difficult stories in our life. But let's do a little closing prayer. So I just invite you to put everything aside for a moment and as if you could just let the sort of the mental version of what you've heard here just sort of filter and drop and allow your awareness to move down into your heart. And as you breathe, feeling yourself breathing into your heart space, as if your heart is your lungs. And with each in-breath, your heart expands. And with each out-breath, it contracts. But with each breath, the heart's capacity increases slightly. Because this is the journey to forgiveness that we are all asked to take. And of course, we all have something and someone that could come to mind, and Denise shared that with us, and we can do that as well. But for now, I'd just invite you to get in touch with this capacity that you have to go to this place within you. Rumi said, beyond wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. So what is this field? What is that place in you that can sit right in the middle of it? In the middle of opposites, where duality even dissolves into beingness, oneness, unity. Breathe into the heart and feel into that place. Let that true self call you in. It's always beckoning you, welcoming you, inviting you, putting down the welcome mat, that you might know yourself as the divine knows you. Love without condition. Love without behaviors or expectations. Love, capital L love, grace, unearned and given in its fullness. Breathe in love. And breathe out whatever is unlike it. Breathing in love. Releasing everything else. Breathing in peace. Peace that passes all human understanding. And breathing in grace. Filled with grace. As an extension of the divine, you are grace itself. In this world, but not of it. You remember this truth about you. And you feel into this with a sense of homecoming, of joy, fully embracing the goodness, the essential goodness that is at the core. And now I invite you to pick one person in your life, just one for now, that you would offer this feeling to. Without any story, just let someone arise in your mind. And know that they too are created by love, that they too enjoy grace, that they too are whole with the wholeness of spirit. And bow to their heart with yours. And bless them. And find yourself in this light together. The light of truth, the light of love, the light of grace, where we truly live and move and have our essential being. And for this we are grateful. And by this we are transformed. And by this we live in unity and love. And so it is. So we are on our way. Yes?